Okay, let's continue. So we are looking at practicing listening, and listening as Isaacs is thinking about listening. And I just want to run through a couple of practices that he encourages, or some practices that he says this is useful for developing your capacity to listen. And I think they will make a lot of sense when you think about the exercise that you've just done. And so the idea of listening is, you can see it relates to following. So it relates to the speech acts that Kantar is calling following. So if somebody proposes something and you then take it and you build on it, in order to be good at following, you have to be good at listening. And this makes sense, right? You have to understand what the other person is trying to convey in order to build on it. Many times, maybe somebody will say something and it will sort of trigger some idea that you have, and you go like, yeah, that's cool. And then you go off and you say something that actually has nothing to do with what the other one was saying. So that would be the opposite of listening. And so he talks about the first thing that he says is that it's good to be aware of thoughts, of your thoughts, and observe your mental, emotional, and somatic responses or activity. And this is exactly what you were doing in the listening role. So you're listening to something, and the reason I said that the person talking should talk about like something simple, just a nice thing that has happened, is because when somebody talks about a nice thing that has happened, it triggers less reactions in you. Whereas if, let's say, they were talking about their opinion on a highly controversial topic, and if their opinion was highly controversial, then that might trigger more reactions in you. Or if you're in a board meeting and somebody is making a proposal that is going to make your life really difficult, you might also have a lot of reactions. And in those situations, you are going to be much more reactive, meaning you're much more likely to just run with whatever thoughts and emotions that comes up in you. So that's why it's nice to practice being aware of your own thoughts and emotions and somatic responses when listening to somebody else in a situation where what the other one is saying isn't going to be hugely impactful on you. So it's like a low stake situation. And so I really recommend practicing in those cases, and that's because then you will build up your skill to have this double awareness, where you use 50% of your awareness on what is happening to what the other person is saying, and 50% of your awareness to sort of monitor how's your system, your thoughts and emotions and somatic responses to what the other person is saying. Last time I mentioned that there is a practice which can be very interesting also for this, and that is, if you have a conversation, you might record a conversation, make a transcript of it, and then you can have two columns. In one column, you just have the transcript of the conversation, and in the other column, you can write down all your what's happening inside of you during the conversation. So all your unspoken thoughts, your unvoiced emotional reactions, even your somatic reactions, you just write all of that down in the other column. And then you can sit nicely in the comfort of your own private space and consider, would it be possible to move something from that column of your inner life to the expressed column, and might it be useful? As I mentioned last time, this is not to say that you should be like an open book and just anything that comes into your mind, you should give voice to that. But it's generally interesting to see some of the things that we're not giving voice to, might that actually contribute to a better decision-making process if we gave voice to it. Listening enables you to do that on the fly, so to speak. That enables you to be aware of what's going on internally, and then have those kind of reflections in the moment. So this is happening in me internally. Is that something I should bring up? Might that be a good idea? If you've practiced on a transcribed conversation, then you might also have rehearsed how would I give voice to it, right? You sort of said, I could have just say what come into my mind, or I could say it in this way and that way, and that makes it easier for you to say it. But the fundamental practice here is the practice of listening, and listening in Isaac's sense is not just listening to the other person, but simultaneously listening to the other person and to all your own internal responses, but without necessarily running with them. Another thing that he says is to practice listening, it's really good to stick to facts, valid judgments versus observable facts, to stick to concrete examples when you speak. And so what he means by that is when you put forward an idea or you speak or something like that, stick to the facts. We normally don't do it. And one of the reasons we don't do it is because we are really bad at distinguishing between facts and our interpretations of the facts. So we might say something like, people in the other department are not being cooperative, right? That's just a fact, they're not being cooperative. No, it's not necessarily a fact. It's like you have observed something, they're behaving, they're doing and saying certain things, and you're interpreting that as being not cooperative. But it might be something else. So many times when we put forward something and say, this is a fact, what we should be saying is, this is my interpretation of the facts. And we might even be oblivious of what are the facts that lead to that interpretation. So when we speak, to be able to make that distinction is also something that really enables us to listen. Because we just deal with sort of like the level of the facts. And when we are able to listen to what the other person is saying, and we know the thoughts and emotions and somatic impulses that trigger in us, that helps us learn that capacity to distinguish between facts and our own interpretive process. And this is something that really clears the way for listening, because then when somebody speaks to us, we can hear the words they're saying, and we can notice how we interpret those words, but we know that that's our interpretation. That's not part of what they're actually saying. That's part of how we process the words when they have come in. Another thing that he talks about is, he says, the practice of following the disturbance. Sometimes people will say something to you and it's disturbing to you. Maybe they have an opinion they put forward and you feel yourself disturbed by it. You feel yourself uneasy. You feel yourself like, oh, this is like... Have you ever experienced this where somebody put forward an opinion and you feel you have to change their opinion? You must change their opinion, and you're quite uneasy if you don't change the opinion. So what he says, like often what we do is we say, this is uncomfortable, this is disturbing, I have to change it. And now we focus all our attention on, how am I going to change it? How am I going to change this person's opinion? How am I going to change the way this conversation is going? Does that make sense? Yeah. So what he says is, follow the disturbance. Back inside, you go like, how did something happened? There were some facts, and then a process happened inside of me, and the end result of that process was a feeling of unease, a feeling of being disturbed. How did I manage to produce that, right? Somebody said something, I don't know, give me an example of an outrageous opinion that would be disturbing. What might it be? Just a random... Yeah. Hitler wasn't that bad, right? Somebody says Hitler wasn't that bad, and you go like, oh my God, right? It's like, if I don't stop this, we're gonna have another Holocaust. I have to stop this, right? But then you say, oh, that was actually the process. So I thought, somebody saying Hitler isn't that bad, like if somebody listening to this person, they might be convinced about it. And you go to the end result and you say like, you know, if I don't do something tomorrow, there's gonna be brown shirts at the institute, right? It's like, and of course now I feel disturbed because I basically see fascism taking over my institution or organization or something. That's just an example. But it's very interesting, whenever you get disturbed by something, don't just take it for granted. say, it might be disturbing and it might be fine to be disturbed by it, but you still want to know, how do you manage to get disturbed by it? Other people might also be disturbed, but following a different path. And can you see how that relates to the capacity to listen to your own thoughts and emotions? If you can't notice your own thoughts and emotions, you also can't notice the inner processes through which a certain input becomes a disturbance in your system. Another thing he says is listening while noticing but not following resistance. So it's a little bit similar. Resistance is another form of disturbance, right? Somebody, again at the board meeting, somebody proposes a particular strategy, and you kind of like go, ugh, I don't want to do that. Again, what is the inner process of sense making that leads to the end product of resisting a proposal? Again, the same thing. Then he says, stand still and listen from silence. And this is the thing we practiced before when I encouraged you to say, listen to somebody else for 5 minutes without any verbal or non-verbal feedback, right? You're cultivating and practicing listening from silence. So you want to be able to just say, well, the place I'm listening from, and here's the thing, if you listen from your reactivity, if you buy into the thoughts and emotions that are occurring in you, you're not listening from silence. And you can't stop the thoughts and emotions that emerge in you, but you can go to a place where you're listening to both what the other person is saying and the reactions inside of you. And that place is silent, right? Because this place is, if there's any reactions here, you go like, oh, this is a reaction. That's something I need to listen to. Does that make sense? So when you consider everything that is happening outside and inside as something you're listening to, the place you're listening from is silent. Good. Then, so these are the practices that Isaac talk about as personal practices that can help you cultivate your capacity for listening. Then he also talks about some group practices. One of them is listening to the whole and name dilemmas. So this is like when you have a group, if everybody listen to, rather than listening to what you are saying and what you are saying and what you are saying, they listen to the whole thing as if this entire group is one organism that is producing a conversation. And I'm listening to the entire group, and then I see what are the dilemmas that this group is trying to come to grips with, is struggling with. And then I name those dilemmas. You can see how this is a speech act that would be a bystand, right? You're zooming out and you're saying, it seems that our conversation is grappling with these particular dilemmas. And there's many dilemmas that you can have in when you are talking about different strategies. Yes, another group practice would be, notice if listening becomes the new agenda, right? So if everybody sits and listens to everything and nobody's making any moves or proposing anything and stuff like that, you go, okay, well, now listening has become the what you call it, the norm, the new norm, and that's just interesting to notice, because now you're following that new norm rather than listening to it. So these are the practices, and can you see how this is what a very, very, if you want to take all of these practices and boil it down to one simple practice, it is just limiting how much you react when other people are talking, limiting your response, giving people 10-20 seconds extra before you jump in. That is a fantastic way of practicing, and in those 10-20 seconds you're noticing what's happening in yourself. So of course the exercise that we did before, where you were listening for 5 minutes, that's an exercise. I'm not proposing that next time you're in the board meeting, you're just gonna sit with your poker face for 5 minutes and like nobody can get you to say anything, right? That would be, I think you'd probably just weird everybody out. But taking some of that exercise and having that capacity to say, let me miss some of the buses, let me miss some of the, I could come with a reaction here, I could say something, I could react, but let me just relax and let that chance to react pass by a few times before I actually jump in and say something. It's a very powerful exercise, and it will completely change the nature of your conversations. Does this make sense? Any questions around the practice of listening? Yeah.
It sounds like listening to the ego at some point.
Yes, I mean, so here again, right, where you use a word ego.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, ego has been used in many different theories, and not everybody defines it the same.
Mm-hmm.
But like generally, if you say the ego is sort of like the collection of habitual and interrelated thoughts and emotions, sure, yeah, you can say that. Other questions or comments or? Yeah.
So you said that we shouldn't confuse the colloquial meaning of listening to the one from Isaac. So everything is just related to following, that listening is that's all, or is there like some underlying?
No, the way he uses the concept of listening is, because in colloquial sense, listening is just like you speak and I'm registering what you're saying. That would be listening. And sometimes you have something like active listening. And in active listening, you are not just listening to what the other person is saying, but you're trying to paraphrase it back to them. And then you're saying, did I get you right? And then you get their confirmation and cool, you've heard them, right? So but that's a different conception of listening. For Isaacs, when he uses the word listening, he means listen simultaneously to what the other person is saying and what that triggers in yourself. So having that divided attention. Yeah.
This is something similar to deep listening. The concept.
I'm not. Whose concept is that?
I'm not so sure, but it's the word that they use in also what is it called when they have some paper also talking about mindfulness practice. That is another level of active listening in which you listen deeply, not only yourself and not only others, but also yourself.
Okay. Yeah. Could be. But whenever you see something like deep listening, right, it's like it flashes out from the page and you go like, this is a concept. Every concept has a history. And you go like, where did they get this from, right? Then you get curious and you want to figure out where does it come from, what's the definition, who are they building on. But if you say it comes from, if it has a connection to mindfulness, a lot of the mindfulness is of course also about noticing your own reactions. And Isaac's work is built upon also the work of David Bohm, which is a physicist. But his work is based on Krishnamurti, who is more operating, in an environment inspired by Indian philosophy. He doesn't say that he belongs to any specific religious or philosophical tradition, but it is sort of informed by that kind of work. So, yeah. Cool. Thanks. Good. Are you ready for the next exercise? Fantastic. So we move to respecting. And before I say a lot about what Isaacs say about respecting, I think it's very useful to have an exercise about it, and then you'll have some concrete experience that you can build on when we talk about the conceptual bit. So again, go together 2 and 2. Yep, we're an even number. Well, there might be a group of 3 when Josefine comes back. So, but go together 2 and 2, and then I'll give you the instruction for the next exercise.